Alright, we just installed the CPU onto the motherboard. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to install something called the heatsink. What happens is the CPU, the thing we just put on, it gets extremely hot because it's doing all that data processing on the computer. It's kind of like the brain of the computer. So it needs its own fan. That's what we're installing now. Alright, I'm back and I got the CPU heatsink mount. So the fan that we're going to be putting on is very heavy usually. And without this mount, it can actually come off of the board, break it, and then your computer overheat and break. So it's very, very important we install this correctly. Another note is every CPU heatsink is different. So definitely always check the instructions that come with it to make sure you install yours correctly. Because the one I might be installing may not be what you are installing. That being said, most of them are very similar in design. Alright, so we just installed the CPU and we're about to install the CPU heatsink mount, which is this block right here. So what we're going to do is we're going to gently, by the corners, flip the motherboard upside down. And we're going to install this. This is a pre-built, and I just took it apart so I know how it goes on. But see this little area in the middle? Do not touch that because that's like the CPU. If you touch it, it breaks the board. When I turned it over, I grabbed the edges of the motherboard. So now I'm going to flip this over so this side faces the other way, like so. And then the holes here line up with the tabs here. There we go. Alright, so now we've done that, we're going to flip the board over again. We're going to hold this part like so. I'm going to flip it over so that part stays in. And there we go. Now we're ready to install it. Alright, well we just installed the bottom part, now for the top. Like I said, I can't stress this enough. Always check the manual for installing the heatsink mount, because sometimes this one, it doesn't specifically matter because it's symmetrical, but most kind are not. And if you have it upside down, then you put the heatsink on upside down and it doesn't work properly. So we're going to line up these holes with the screw holes like that. And now, you guessed it, we're going to screw it in. With these heat sinks, the heatsink mount, they come with screws. You must use the exact screws that came with it. Most computers are going to, and their parts, use Phillips head screws. I got this out of my drawer at home. It's just a regular sized Phillips head screwdriver. So I'm going to connect the points on here. And then I'm going to line it up. Let me adjust the camera. There we go. And I'm going to do righty tighty, lefty loosey. You never want to over tighten anything. So once you feel it firm, just tighten it one last time a little bit, and then you should be good. The reason being, if you ever have to remove this, because you're installing probably a better heat sink in the future, which a lot of people do, it's not going to be very easy to come off if you over tighten it. And alright, so I've screwed the two in here. To make it easier for myself, I'm just gonna turn the board around, like so. And then I'm gonna screw these two in, right here. Notice how with my other hand, I'm barely holding on to the board to make sure I don't scrap up the motherboard with the screwdriver. Because if I'm not holding the board, it might slip while I'm screwing these screws in, and that could be bad. And there we go. Now I'm going to turn the board around again. There we go. And now we've installed the heatsink mount. I just want to say, so far we've installed the CPU. We've installed the CPU heatsink mount. That's a mouthful, huh? Try saying that 3 times fast. Heatsink mount, heatsink mount, heatsink mount. Can't do it. Guess it wasn't as hard as I thought it was. But before we actually install the heatsink itself, we need to install a very important thing. This thing's called thermal paste. Now, if you Google it, there are a billion ways to install thermal paste. People will tell you that one way is better than the other. And that is slightly true. But like, slightly, like not enough to make a difference. But the biggest thing though is it's better to overdo it than to underdo it. So like, if you accidentally put too much on, and I'll be showing you how, don't worry, but it's not gonna damage anything. It'll be messy, but it's not gonna damage anything. Now, if you put too little on there, it's not gonna cover the CPU correctly, and it'll get too hot, and that will damage the processor. So I'm gonna show you how I personally do it, but there are a billion ways to do it, and in the description, there was a YouTuber I found that actually went through and tested every method and how it does on performance. And if you're just curious, you could, watch that video. So here we go. Alright guys, I'm installing the thermal paste now. I took off the cap of my thermal paste. And what I personally do is I'm going to make kind of like a little spiral, But I'm going to start in the center, squeeze it out. And remember, it's better to use too much than too little. See how I'm not afraid of how much I'm putting on there? A lot of people might say, hey, I put too much on. But that's okay, right? We're not experts, right? We're just building a computer. But the key takeaway, though, on doing this is that the thermal paste is all over the processor. Because we're going to be putting this on top, and it's going to squeeze it all down and spread it out. Alright guys, we just applied that thermal paste, and now we're going to put the heatsink on. This thing. For the record, just, because why not? A lot of newer ones do not look like this. But they basically all function the same. Alright, so here's my motherboard. This particular heatsink, it tells me backup system. And it has these things on here that hold it into the brackets right there. So I'm gonna try really hard to do this while holding a phone. But, so basically I'm gonna put this on top here. Alright, I haven't pressed it on yet, because I don't need to. But see how there's like the keyhole here and the key? I'm gonna stick one in there. And I forgot to mention this, but see how that's down? That's because this is the locking mechanism. Then we're gonna put this over those pins here. Alright, we're gonna slide that up with it being down. So you may not get it on the first try, and that's okay. So let me do this real quick. Yeah, and see how the holes are in now? We want to flip this switch, and it may take a little bit of pressure. See how much pressure I put into that? Alright, and now it's in. The most important thing to take away from this, though, is that it's locked in like that. It's locked in on this side. This is down. It's positioned correctly. And that the thermal paste is on, because if the thermal paste is not on, this will not do its job. And now, because why not, we're gonna hook it into the motherboard. Motherboards are usually labeled, but if you can't find a label, your motherboard manual will show you in there too. But see on here is the CPU fan. Well, this is the heatsink right here. This metal part. This is the fan. So the fan connector has these three little things here and these little nubs. Well, on the port, you see the three little things and the little tab. That tab slides in between those nubs. So we're going to stick it in like so. Bada boom. And congratulations, you've just installed your first CPU, CPU fan, CPU heatsink onto a motherboard. So congrats, you pat yourself on the back. There you go. And you also connected it too. You should be really proud of yourself right now.